The sun had already begun its slow crawl across the endless Texas sky when the last rider crossed the finish line. Dust hung in the air like a shroud, thick with the scent of sweat-soaked horses, leather, and the faint metallic tang of blood from a split lip. The annual Lone Star Rodeo, held on the sprawling McAllister Ranch just outside Lubbock, had drawn the biggest crowd in a decade. Not for the bronc riding or the barrel racing, though those were fierce. No, they came for the wager. It had started as a whisper in the beer tents 3 nights earlier. Harlan Hank McAllister, the giant cowboy himself, 6'8" in his battered boots, shoulders wide enough to block out the moon, had leaned over a scarred wooden table and stared down Miss Evelyn Hart, the sharp-tongued schoolteacher from Amarillo who'd never backed down from a dare in her life. "You ride better than half the men here," Hank had rumbled, voice like gravel rolling downhill. "Beat me in the final heat, and the ranch hands'll build you that library you keep yammerin' about. Lose, and you're mine for the night." The tent had gone dead quiet. Evelyn, all fire-red hair and storm-gray eyes, had tilted her chin up until she met his gaze. "Defined mine, cowboy." Hank's grin had been slow, wolfish. "Whatever I say it is." She'd laughed then, sharp and bright, and stuck out her hand. "Deal." Now, 3 days later, the deal was done. Evelyn's mare, a black-hearted devil named Tempest, had flown down the final stretch like God himself was chasing her. Hank's stallion, Thunderbolt, had been half a length behind, neck arched, nostrils flaring. The crowd roared as Evelyn crossed the line first. Hats flew. Whiskey bottles clinked. Somewhere, a fiddle started up a triumphant reel. But Hank didn't look defeated. He swung down from Thunderbolt with the easy grace of a man born in the saddle, boots thudding into the dirt. The giant cowboy strode across the arena, dust swirling around his calves, and stopped in front of Evelyn. She was still astride Tempest, chest heaving, cheeks flushed from the wind and the wind. The crowd hushed. Hank reached up, hooked one massive hand around her waist, and lifted her clean out of the saddle like she weighed nothing. Evelyn's boots dangled a foot off the ground. She glared down at him, but there was a spark in her eyes that hadn't been there before the race. "You lost," she said. "I did." His voice carried, deep enough to rattle the bleachers. "But a deal's a deal." He set her down gently, then stepped back. The sun caught the sweat on his brow, turned it to gold. Every eye in the place was on them. Hank's gaze never left hers. "Take off your clothes." A gasp rippled through the crowd like a stone dropped in still water. Someone dropped a beer bottle. It shattered. Evelyn's lips parted. For the first time in her 28 years, she had no quick comeback. The wind tugged at her braid, loosened a strand that whipped across her cheek. Hank didn't blink. "Right here. Right now." Everything but the boots. Old Mrs. Delgado from the church choir clutched her pearls. Sheriff Boone, leaning against the fence with a toothpick in his teeth, straightened up like he'd been electrocuted. A dozen phones rose into the air, red recording lights blinking. Evelyn's hands moved to the buttons of her plaid shirt. 1, 2, 3. The fabric parted, revealing a white cotton camisole underneath, damp with sweat and clinging to her skin. She shrugged the shirt off her shoulders and let it fall into the dust. The crowd was a held breath. She towed off her hat next, red hair spilling down her back in a wild cascade. Then the belt. The jeans were trickier, boots first. She bent, unlaced them, kicked them aside. The denim slid down her legs, pooling at her ankles. She stepped out of them, standing in nothing but the camisole, a pair of plain cotton panties, and the defiant tilt of her chin. Hank's eyes tracked every inch of skin revealed, but his expression didn't change. No leer. No triumph. Just a steady, burning focus, like a man staring into the heart of a wildfire and deciding whether to walk through it. Evelyn lifted her arms. "Camisole too?" Hank nodded once. She peeled it off. The sun hit her bare shoulders, her collarbones, the soft curve of her breasts. Gooseflesh rose along her arms, not from cold but from the weight of 1,000 stairs. She hooked her thumbs in the waistband of her panties, paused. "Everything," Hank said quietly. The panties joined the pile. She stood naked in the middle of the rodeo arena, boots forgotten somewhere in the dust, hair whipping around her face like a battle flag. The giant cowboy looked at her like she was the only thing in the world worth seeing. Then he did something no one expected. He unbuttoned his own shirt. 1 button. 2. The black fabric parted, revealing a chest carved from years of roping steers and wrestling storms. A jagged scar ran from his left collarbone to the center of his sternum, souvenir from a bull named Diablo back in 19. He shrugged the shirt off, let it fall. The crowd was beyond stunned now. They were statues. Hank toed off his boots. Unbuckled his belt. The jeans went next. He stepped out of them, standing in nothing but a pair of black boxer briefs that did little to hide the power coiled in his thighs. Then those were gone too. He was magnificent. Every inch the giant cowboy, broad, scarred, sun-bronzed, and utterly unashamed. The sun worshipped the ridges of muscle across his back, the taper of his waist, the heavy strength of his legs. He took 1 step toward Evelyn. Then another. Until they were close enough that she could feel the heat rolling off his skin. "Deal was," he said, voice low enough that only she could hear, "you're mine for the night." Evelyn's pulse hammered in her throat. "And you're mine." A flicker of surprise crossed his face. Then something hotter. Approval. He reached out, slow enough that she could have stepped away. She didn't. His hand cupped the back of her neck, thumb brushing the pulse point beneath her jaw. Then he kissed her. Not gentle. Not sweet. Acclaiming. Teeth and tongue and the faint taste of whiskey and dust. Evelyn's hands came up, nails digging into the hard muscle of his shoulders. She kissed him back like she was trying to win something else entirely. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. The crowd had forgotten how to make noise. Hank bent, scooped her up against his chest like she was made of air. Evelyn's legs wrapped around his waist instinctively. He turned, strode toward the gate where his black pickup waited, engine already growling. The his ranch hands, parted like the Red Sea. Someone started clapping. Then another. By the time Hank reached the truck, the entire arena was on its feet, cheering like they'd just witnessed the second coming. He set Evelyn in the passenger seat, buck naked and glorious. Climbed in behind the wheel. The truck peeled out, kicking up a rooster tail of dust that blotted out the sun. They didn't speak until the ranch house was in sight, 2 stories of weathered stone and wraparound porch, nestled against a stand of cottonwoods. Hank killed the engine. "Still think you won?" he asked. Evelyn looked at him, hair wild, lips swollen, eyes bright with something that looked a lot like victory. "I know I did." He laughed then, a sound like thunder rolling in from the plains. Got out, came around, lifted her out again. This time, she didn't wait for him to carry her. She took his hand, led him up the steps, through the screen door that creaked like an old friend. Inside, the house smelled of cedar and coffee and something faintly sweet, peaches, maybe, from the pie cooling on the windowsill. Afternoon light slanted through the blinds, striping the hardwood floor in gold. Evelyn turned to him in the hallway. "Bedroom?" "Upstairs." His voice was rough. "But I ain't waitin' that long." He backed her against the wall, hands sliding down to grip her hips. Evelyn arched into him, felt the hard length of him press against her belly. She reached between them, wrapped her fingers around him. Hank groaned, forehead dropping to hers. "Christ, Evie." She stroked once, slow. "You said whatever you want. I want you screamin' my name before the sun sets. Better get to work, cowboy." He did. Mouth on hers, hands everywhere, cupping her breasts, thumbs circling her nipples until she gasped. Down her stomach, parting her thighs. One thick finger slid inside her, then two. Evelyn's head thumped back against the wall. She rode his hand shamelessly, hips rolling, breath hitching. More, she demanded. Hank dropped to his knees. The sight of him there, giant cowboy, naked and hungry, looking up at her like she was a goddess, sent a bolt of pure lust straight through her. He hooked one of her legs over his shoulder, opened her with his thumbs, and licked a slow stripe up her center. Evelyn's hands fisted in his hair. He didn't tease. He devoured. Tongue circling her clit, fingers curling inside her, finding that spot that made her knees buckle. She came hard and fast, a sharp cry echoing off the walls. Hank stood, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, and grinned. That's one. He lifted her again, carried her up the stairs two at a time. The bedroom was all dark wood and white linens, a ceiling fan turning lazily overhead. He tossed her onto the bed. Evelyn bounced, laughed, reached for him. Hank crawled over her, settled between her thighs. The head of his cock nudged her entrance. He paused. Tell me you want this. I want you, she said. All of you. Now. He pushed in, slow and relentless. Evelyn's breath caught at the stretch, the burn, the perfect fullness. When he was seated to the hilt, he stilled, let her adjust. Then he moved. Long, deep strokes that had her clawing at his back. She met him thrust for thrust, legs locked around his waist, heels digging into the small of his back. The bed creaked. The headboard thumped against the wall. Outside, cicadas buzzed in the cottonwoods. Hank shifted, hooked her knees over his elbows, opened her wider. The angle was devastating. Evelyn's second orgasm built fast, coiling tight in her belly. She bit his shoulder to muffle her scream when it hit. He followed her over, burying himself deep, groaning her name like a prayer. They lay tangled and sweating, the fan stirring the air above them. After a while, Evelyn traced the scar on his chest. Diablo? She asked. Diablo, he confirmed. Took 8 seconds and half my hide. She pressed her lips to the scar. Worth it. Hank's hand slid down her spine, cupped her ass. You ain't seen nothin' yet. Round 2 was slower. Languid kisses, hands exploring every inch. He flipped her over, took her from behind, one hand fisted in her hair, the other slipping between her legs to tease her clit. Evelyn pushed back against him, took control, rode him until they were both shaking. Round 3 was in the shower, water sluicing over them, steam fogging the glass. Hank pressed her against the tile, lifted her legs around his waist, fucked her until the hot water ran out. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in bruised purples and oranges, they were back in bed, sheets twisted around their ankles, skin cooled and sticky. Evelyn lay with her head on his chest, listening to the steady thump of his heart. So, she said, library gets built. First thing tomorrow, he promised. But you're overseeing it. Naked, if I have my way. She laughed, the sound muffled against his skin. We'll negotiate. Hank's fingers traced idle patterns on her back. Evie. I didn't wager to humiliate you. I know. I wagered 'cause I wanted you. Been wantin' you since the first time you called me a Neanderthal with a hat in the feed store. She lifted her head, grinned. You were blocking the entire aisle with your giant self. Still. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. You could have said no. I could have, she agreed. But then I wouldn't be here. He kissed her, soft this time. Stay. I have a job. Students. A life in Amarillo. I'll build you a school here. Bigger library. Whatever you want. Evelyn studied him. The giant cowboy, laid bare in more ways than one. vulnerable in a way the rodeo crowd would never see. "I'll think about it," she said. But she already knew the answer. Weeks turned into months. The library rose on the edge of the ranch, all glass and cedar, filled with books Evelyn handpicked. The school followed. Hank's ranch hands grumbled about city girl ideas, but showed up every Saturday to help. The story of the rodeo wager became legend. Told in bars from Lubbock to Laredo, embellished with each telling. Some said Evelyn had hexed Hank's horse. Others swore the giant cowboy had planned to lose all along. No one got it quite right. Except the two of them. One year to the day after the race, Hank found Evelyn in the library, barefoot in a sundress, shelving poetry books. He dropped to one knee in the aisle between fiction and history. "Marry me," he said. No ring. Just his hat in his hands and his heart in his eyes. Evelyn didn't make him wait. Yes. They married at sunset in the same arena where it all began. Evelyn wore white lace and her old riding boots. Hank wore black, no tie, sleeves rolled up to show the scar. The crowd was smaller this time, just family, ranch hands, a few curious locals. But the cheering was just as loud. Later, in the quiet of the ranch house, Hank carried her over the threshold for the second time in their lives. "Take off your clothes," he whispered against her ear. Evelyn smiled, slow and wicked. "Make me, cowboy." He did. And somewhere out on the plains, the wind carried their laughter across the cotton fields, all the way to the stars.